Okay.
So surrendering your fear is a big part of the book as well. It's in the subtitle. So I wanted to know and ask you, why do you feel like that's such an important part of making what matters happen?
Good question. For me, fear has been the biggest thing that's held me back from living on purpose. And when I talk about fear, I mean fear of what people think, fear of things that challenge us to think that we're not worth anything.
Mhm.
Because there are good fears and bad fears. So normal fear is things like don't jump off a cliff. We need fear in our lives to help direct us in the right direction sometimes. But then there is abnormal fear, which makes us question our worth.
Mm.
So that type of fear, that paralyzing, deafening fear, has been a big part of my life. I know it very well. And as you'll read in the book, there's many ups and downs and pitfalls and a lot of things I wasn't even able to share in the book. Times when fear has ruled my life over faith. And that's the starting point. I think just the act of acknowledging our fear, not crushing it or pushing it away or conquering it in some way, the act of meeting our fears, learning to understand them, just like we would understand how a person works. Maybe we're getting to know a new friend.
Right.
And I talk a lot about this in the book too, but understanding our fears helps us to understand why we behave the way we do sometimes, why we are hesitant about some things. Understanding our fears helps to unlock a good kind of confidence in us, right, too, to be able to move past these things and get to the stuff that really matters. So we have the freedom to live our lives on purpose.
Well, and if you want to be a person who walks in faith, I've always found, well, one of the lessons I've learned over and over in my life is that faith and fear can't coexist in the same space.
So true.
And if you don't
Yeah.
meet that fear, whatever it is, whether it's fear of looking stupid or fear of
Mm-hmm.
not being perfect or whatever it might be, um, you can't move forward in faith till you get that out of the way.
Yeah. And I think, too, as women, we're so hesitant to tell people about our fears because we feel like we have to keep it all together. And especially in today's world, especially the Instagram world, to use that as an example, it is a photograph-based platform. So
Right.
all we see a lot of times are these perfect pictures, if you will, of people's lives, these frames of lives, and it makes us feel inadequate. It makes us have a lot of fear and comparison and so many things that prevent us from doing the good things that God has given us to do. And I've
Right.
fallen victim to that a lot of times. So I think it's just a matter of starting to recognize that in yourself and just saying, all right, I've got a little bit of paralyzing fear going on in my life right now. I know God doesn't want me to have this. And I know he promises us a way out of it.
Right.
So God, help me with this. How do I, get out of this? There's a lot of other ways to do it too, but that's the best one.
Well, and even to give a different name other than fear, like you just said with comparison, you say that comparison is coveting.
Yes,
And
it is.
he definitely doesn't want us to do that. It's in the
No,
commandments. So
that's right.
that's an important thing when you feel that coming, I think, to get rid of that as well.
Definitely.
So, I think this is such a great book, obviously, to start the new year, which is why we chose it. And everybody gets a lot of energy around
Yay.
new year, new life, new goals, new things.
Mhm.
Sometimes, though, people will come into a new year and they feel like they're stuck, and they don't necessarily feel motivated. And I love one of your quotes about roadblocks. And what if our hesitations aren't roadblocks, but starting points? So, how do you know the difference? Or how do you turn a roadblock or what feels like a roadblock in your life into a starting point?
That's a really good question. I think about the season that I went through last January and February, this past January and February. It was not the shiny, fresh start that I had hoped for. So if anyone's listening and they're feeling that right now, I just think that to everything there is a season. And sometimes we're going to go through seasons in our lives of grief or loss or mourning, or for me, it was loss. I had a miscarriage early in the year. And it sort of set the tone for the year that now I know in retrospect, even through those hard times, maybe those are opportunities for new growth. Maybe those, like you said from the book, are not roadblocks, but opportunities for us to start fresh. And I really believe fully that God has good for us if we believe in him in all of those roadblocks. So if you're in that place, my advice to you is to own it. And that's really where the book begins, and where my advice to anyone begins is you have to know where you are in order to know how to get to the next spot. You have
Yeah.
to know the ground that you're leaping from in order to be able to leap. So acknowledging where you are, owning where you are, just saying, you know what, I don't feel good, starting this year. Sometimes that can be the best step you can take to get past it.
Right.
And again, sometimes it's a lot more deep-seated than that if you're going through something that's a bit heavier. But a lot of times it's just acknowledging where you are.
Absolutely. That is knowing where you're leaping from. I love that. You have to know you're coming from one place
Yes.
to get to another. The dance analogy. Now, I actually wanted to have you talk a little bit about, you just spoke of seasons,
Yeah.
what you've learned about growing your garden over the last couple of years. Just people who might follow
Oh.
you on Instagram, or even if they don't, Lara has a beautiful garden and gardens every day with her daughter Grace, and it's just so fun to see how excited both of you get about the harvest and tending the
Yeah.
garden. And I've heard you speak recently about that, like using analogies that you've learned from gardening, and I would just like you to talk about that for a little bit, just as how it relates to making things happen.
Mhm. Yeah, it's amazing that God has given us so many examples just in our everyday lives, in the world around us, in our environment, and for me in my garden, to show me his purposes for life and to teach me too. So in the book, I walk through a lot of what I have learned from each season in our life, proverbial seasons and real seasons. But for me, gardening has taught me so many things. I'll just give a few examples. One would be something I've learned recently. This is kind of new that I haven't really talked about too much, but through this journey that I've had over this year of this really hard winter, the season of inward reflection for me, it was a season of heartache and of loss. And as winter shows us, it's usually a season of the ground being very still and life not being present. And it's just a season of stillness, of reflection. We kind of are drawn inside to prepare for spring.
Right.
And then spring comes and new life comes, and we're reminded of God's goodness in that. And then we also are in a time of planting seeds. And that's really one of the biggest components to making things happen is you have to understand the idea that planting even a tiny seed, like in the Bible, it talks about the mustard seed being one of the smallest seeds, but it can grow into one of the largest trees. And what an amazing picture for our lives that is, that even when we plant the tiniest seed and just give it a little bit of water every day, and a little bit of nurturing, and a little bit of sun, I think we get so hung up in our culture and in our generation on having overnight success or having everything together right away. And that's just not the way God designed a lot of things, most of things. Most of the best things in life come little by little. So that idea has been revolutionary for me, and it's been shown to me so many times in the little seeds that sprout little by little and eventually become, for me this past year, like 20-foot tomato plants. It was just like awesome to see. I was like, God, look what you did. It's so great. And then also to see there is this beautiful kind of symbiotic relationship, this togetherness that we have to have with God when we garden. We can't do it by ourselves. We can't garden without sunlight. But at the same time, we are responsible for tending and cultivating. So I think that's a great picture to how God wants us to live our lives, that ultimately he is the one that is going to bring the rain and bring the sun. But we also have a responsibility to use the things that we have and use them well.
Right.
And so I've gone through this season of this deep, dark winter, a quiet, still winter, a spring that gave me a little bit of hope, summer, which was a hot time of working hard, and then fall, you start to see that glorious color pop out, and we're just reminded that the seasons are turning again. And then for me in our lives, we've just gotten into the deep part of our adoption process. So we're moving into that journey, and we have our home study next week, and it's just been amazing to see God working on our hearts in that, and just to kind of see this year come full circle. Whereas I thought I would be having another child this past October, he had a different plan for that.
Right.
And I've been able to talk to a lot of women now about miscarriage and loss and understand that in a better way. So now I see the blessings in all of that. So to answer your question, all of these seasons and gardening have taught me so much.
I love it.
I could probably write a whole book just about that, but
Well, there have been
yeah.
lots of songs and wonderful things, but I think it's a good thing to remember. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons we're surrounded by reminders, to be honest, because that's something
Yeah.
I heard you say that, like talking about tending, and that was just sort of revolutionary because I am good at deadlines and working really hard to like get to the end. And the idea of doing something every day is really hard for me, but I've been working better at that. Just the idea of tending. There's a garden that I'm tending and I have to you can let it go for a couple of days. You know, you
Right.
can let some weeds grow for a couple
Right.
of days, but you can't let them go for a month or you're going to have a garden full of weeds. So,
Absolutely.
there's lots of analogies all over.
It's amazing.
I
Yeah.
love it. Um, so I wanted to just ask a couple quick questions. We're kind of I want to be respectful of your time. But where did they go? Here they are. Just kind of like rapid fire questions to get to know you
Sure.
a little
Go
bit
for
better.
it.
Because your book, is a little bit about success. I wondered what is the definition of success to you? Like whose face pops in your mind when someone asks you, who do you think is a successful person?
It's a really good question. I have someone that popped immediately to my mind. One of my dear friends who goes to church with me, her name is Tawana Goodwin, and her name is mentioned in the book, and I'm going to cry now. Blah. She is a middle school teacher, and she is one of the most humble women that I know, and just always there when you need something, like always there to give a prayer. I remember there was a time several months ago where I got suddenly very sick, and Ari was on call, and so he was working, and I was like, I can't get out of bed. I'm not going to be able to feed my daughter. And so she immediately came over and fed her and stayed with her all night. And she probably already had other plans. So it's just little things like that. When I think of success, that success is walking humbly with God. And I think of people like Tawana, who I want to be like. It's not Bill Gates or anybody like that. Not to say that they don't do good things, but
Right.
yeah, that to me is the definition of success, is loving God and then loving other people through that love.
I love that because I think that's, for me, one of the messages of your book is taking the things that you talk about and the stories that you have learned through your life and applying them to my own so that I can have a life that's set up to do that for people.
Hmm.
Because you can't just drop everything and go help someone unless you're taking care of yourself and your own things at home.
Yeah.
You have to be able to be still enough in spaces in your life to listen to what God's telling you and who he's
Yeah.
asking you to help.
It's
So,
true.
and
I
if
feel
you're
like I've said
so,
that to myself many times, that I
yeah,
just don't want to move so fast that I miss my life. And I must have said that to myself for 5 years straight. There was a period of 7 years when I started my business where I was working 24/7. And I said that to myself over and over. I felt like I was moving so fast that I was missing my life.
hmm
And then God started to shake me up and get my attention. But yeah.
One of the leaders in my church, Jeffrey R. Holland, I heard him say once that God gives you messages about serving people just to see if you're listening sometimes. And if
Mm-hmm.
you're listening, you'll get the opportunity to help people more.
So
And
true.
if you
Yeah.
don't have enough space in your life, he didn't say this, this is my, addition. But if
Yes.
you don't have enough space in your life to listen and hear, then you can't be the kind of person that helps. So I love
Yeah,
that. I love that. Is there a
absolutely.
book that you're reading right now that you love that you would recommend?
Yeah, there's actually a couple. I recently just finished Love, Skip, Jump by
Oh, I want to
Shalene
read that.
Bryan,
Hmm.
and it was fantastic. Just a really quick read. To be honest, I'm not a big reader. Sorry, book club friends. I'm not. Like I said, I have a really short attention span, but
Yeah.
I zipped through this book in 24 hours. It was just really compelling about her journey of living as an Orange County socialite, if you will, to being in Africa and how that totally changed her
Oh,
life.
wow. Awesome.
And then also Radical by David Platt is a challenging book that challenges us on many levels, but definitely recommend it. It's a great read.
Awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
Is there something like a book or something that you find that you give to people if you want, like, what do you find yourself giving most besides your own book, like,
That's a good
or
question.
the
There
Bible,
is
something
a
like
book
that?
that I know you love as well, Love Does by Bob Goff.
Oh, I love it.
Um, it's just one of those books that helps to shift your perspective a little bit. I don't totally agree with everything in his book, but most of it just lit my heart on fire
Hmm.
and just made me feel like, yeah, this is what serving people is all about. And this is what love is all about. Yeah, so another great book. I also love Jen Hatmaker's Seven.
Oh,
It's one
I
of those
love that.
books that you cannot unread
Hmm.
and definitely challenged me and changed me in a lot of ways. God used that in a big way. So, yeah, great books.
I love her. She lives here in Austin, and I got a chance to meet her, and
Oh,
she's
nice.
just as advertised. She is wonderful, wonderful. That
I
is
love it.
awesome. I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time
Oh, thank
today. I
you.
sure appreciate it. And
It was a joy.
where else can people find out more about you if they, are sitting watching this on their computer and have a browser window open? Where do you want them to
You
go?
can go to laracasey.com. It's spelled laracasey.com. I have a blog, but I don't blog very often. Although by the time you're watching this, I probably will have had my 2015 goal setting series going.
Awesome.
And then on Instagram, that's kind of become my blog. So Instagram.com/LaraCasey.
Yes, I think all of us that are moms have found
Yep.
that that's the easiest place to do it all.
If you wonder why my posts are so long, that's why.
Love it. That is wonderful. Well, we'll put some links so people can find you quickly. Is there anything related to the book on your
Yeah, on my
website?
website, you can find a lot of information there. There's even
Awesome.
a video that we created that I think is just a great picture of chasing perfect, that the very first chapter of the book. And you can find that at laracasey.com/book.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a joy. Bye, y'all.
Bye.